in this statute, or in combined with the appropriations process, by which an appropriation that has no relationship to COVID, the sports arena has been mentioned as an example. Where is the check on that in the statute? The COVID-19 sports arena is going to be built. It has nothing to do with COVID-19. It has to do with sports. Where's the check?
And Your Honor, I think we start getting into a series of sort of political questions, of almost non-justiciable questions of what's connected enough to the fiscal emergency. To shift from the sports arena for a moment to what Mr. Testa said earlier about, well, what about the pension payment? Why can't that be cut? And that's just one example of why issues are extremely complicated, because you have, with the pension payment, which the state has been trying to pay, getting its fiscal house in order, you have, if the state were to borrow from the MLF, you have a 2.6% interest rate there. But if the state makes the pension payment, the rate of investment return is 7.3%. And if you don't make the pension payment, then you increase the UAAL and you thereby foist a long-term debt on a future generation. So all of these questions are much more complicated, and policy decisions.
So they may be complicated, but it does not necessarily absolve the legislature from putting some meat on the bones in terms of the act, so it's subject to judicial review. You would admit that if the act said we're going to use part of these monies to build a stadium, that would not pass muster, correct?
Your Honor, I look to the Works Project Administration during the Great Depression, when they were specifically doing things like that in order to promote the economy and provide relief for people.
Okay, so are you suggesting that if this bill specifically said that money, $1 billion, will be allocated to construct a new sports arena, that the judiciary would have no role in reviewing that to see whether or not it met the constitutional requirements of subparagraph 3E? Are you saying that?
No, Your Honor, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that the standard of deference is extreme deference during an emergency to a legislative decision. That doesn't mean it's unreviewable. That means, as this court said in Jem Monod, and as the United States Supreme Court recently said in United Pentecostal, that the standard is one of, is it wholly arbitrary? Is it an abuse of power? And if the legislature could come up with some sort of rationale as to why that was necessary, then the court would need to evaluate, well, that sounds arbitrary, or actually there is a rational connection there. It is reviewable. It's an extreme deference.
Set aside that last point for a second about reviewability. When I asked you earlier, could the money be spent to subsidize a sports arena to the tune of $1 billion, you said no. Imagine that the legislation said, and we do so in part because we will generate thousands of jobs that will help provide relief to those who've been unemployed as a result of COVID-19. Is that an appropriate spending of the $9.9 billion from the state's perspective?
Yes, Your Honor. I think if it, and I caveat my prior answer, I think that if the legislature, who has a wider view than I of the economic need in the state and the best means to to remediate that, if they were to be able to come up with an explanation of why this sports arena were necessary to meet the fiscal emergency that the pandemic had caused, then yes, I think that would be acceptable. I think the problem